and welcome. So today I'm doing a video on transplanting, in particular transplanting tomatoes. So I have here in my tray 4 different types of tomatoes I've grown, but they are starting to get to the point where they are done in their little starters. I have 2 in each just in case one of them doesn't make it, as you can see. And as well you can see, one of them's always a lot weaker and doesn't do well. Not always, but sometimes. And I always choose between the 2 which one I think is best. I just pluck the other one off and keep the one. And when you're transplanting tomatoes, these bottom first leaves, you're going to want to pluck off. Very gently, as not to hurt the rest of the plant. Some people use scissors, but I find my fingernail works. And tomatoes have a wonderful thing about growing up the stems. So even though those weren't under light when I first planted them, they bolted a bit. When I transplant them, I'm going to put them into a bigger pot. And I'm going to use soil. Now for me, I like to mix my soil. Half potting soil and half something like black earth or compost. Sometimes I'll make my own from outside, and I'll take just some simple things like peat moss and compost and soil from my garden, and I'll make my soil for potting. I find this a lot better than using the peat-based ones at the store. The straight peat-based ones seem to hold a lot of moisture, and they seem to get mold really easy. So I find this for me is the best success. So pushing down that plant nice and far. I'm going to make sure when I put in the soil, I gently put it around, keeping up the stem. And now that stem that's in there is going to grow roots. You'll never guess that I hadn't had lights on for the first little bit while I was growing them, and they bolted. And it'll grow healthier for that, have the roots out of the stem and have a better structure down below, because that stem gives it a really good anchor as it grows. So I like to always start my tomatoes small and then kind of go from there. So again, I'll show you with another one. I'm just going to take my little seed starter. I'm going to gently pull the sides and take the stem of my tomatoes, pull it out, bringing out this. I'm going to pluck off the ones that I don't want to keep. I'm throwing them right into the pot for nutrients. They'll break down in there. But some people do that and some people don't. I'm going to pluck off my bottom leaves, leaving just the top. I'm going to push it right down into that pot, so that way I have the stem nearly all buried. And take my soil that I've mixed, build it up around the stem, giving this guy a lot more space to grow for roots. And this should be the only transplant for these guys before I set them out in my garden. They should be a good size by then. And keeping track of what types. These are little tags that I bought at the store. But something else you can do that's a lot simpler and lasts just as long. You never mistake what your plants are. Take a little bit of white electrical tape that you can buy at the store for about $1. And here I have a little stick that I ripped in half, a little skewer stick. I'm going to put that tape on there. Then I'll use a Sharpie. I'll write down what the plant is. A permanent Sharpie won't rub off, and the white won't have the dirt stick to it. So then when you put it in there, you have really good tags for your plants. I'm just going to finish off my tomatoes here. I like to use plastic pots versus peat. I'm going to tell you why. I find that with veggies, your roots will grow into those peat pots, and when you have them in the garden, it'll almost choke off your veggie, and the roots won't get out. Some will, but not all. You won't get very good production. So I find the best way is just to use the plastic one. And You know, there's a whole thing about plastics not being good right now, but I reuse my plastic pots year after year. Some of them I save from when I buy at the greenhouse, and other ones I've collected free on Kijiji and things like that. So what I have is a collection of pots that I keep reusing every year. And the thing is with peat, is it's a renewable resource, but it takes thousands of years for a peat bog to develop. And by mining the peat continually, we're depleting a resource. And by using the plastic pots over and over, we're recycling, and we're not depleting that resource. For transplanting, it's easy to get the pots out. You don't have to worry about the roots getting, you know, all caught up and everything. And then for planting the garden, it's easy too. And for those of you doing container gardens, you know, you're going to use the same pots in your deck year after year. So really, the plastic pots are good. Like I said, you see how easy these are coming out. With the peat, you're ripping off the sides and damaging that plant a lot, and puts into a lot of shock when you're doing that much damage to the roots. So while you can see when I'm transplanting my plants, they're not very root bound yet. There's still a lot of room for them to grow. Doing it ahead of time, it doesn't really interrupt their natural growth, and they just keep growing. It's like they never got transplanted. After I plant these, I'm going to give them a little bit of a hit of water with some magnesium in it. The reason for the magnesium is it helps the plant take up nutrients in the soil. And having a combination of soil, compost, and peat, the nutrients are in there. And because they're not really water dissolved, it's a little harder for the plant to get them versus your water-based chemical fertilizers. But then you have a natural way of keeping the nutrients for your plants. This one kind of ripped the one plant out as I was pulling it out, but luckily I have two. So now when I plant it in there, the one that I accidentally ripped out will just go into the bottom soil, and the other one will grow happy, and I'll have tomatoes to plant in my garden. So, well, when I'm done planting these guys, these are all my larger varieties of potatoes. This is about the time that you want to start your other variety of potatoes that not many know about. They're called Tiny Tims. Now, Tiny Tims are a plant. In total size, they're going to get about, you know, yay big. They're going to produce lots of thumbnail-sized tomatoes. The flavor is amazing and really sweet. The really nice thing about Tiny Tims is I like to dig them up and bring them in a pot in the fall. And I put them in my window. Now, I didn't do this last year, but I've done this many other years. And those tomatoes are going to keep growing all winter, just a little bit. And all those green tomatoes are going to ripen over the course of the winter. So what that does is that gives you a winter garden, and you don't even need much light for that. Those Tiny Tims I found just putting in a east-facing window is all the light that they need for the winter, and they'll keep ripening up your tomatoes, and you'll have fresh tomatoes all winter. I let them grow. I don't trim them at all. They're a very low-maintenance tomato, and you know, they're a bush variety, low to the ground. They don't get big like the others. When you plant them out again in the spring, they'll produce right away. My one Tiny Tim I had living for 3 years. I was putting it outside in the pot, and I was planting the pot and tomato and everything right in the ground. I had it in a half-gallon pot. I left it out there all winter, or all summer, and then in the fall I just dug it up and made sure there were no insects on it, and brought it back into the house and put it into my window. Well, that's about it for this episode. I hope you learned something about how to transplant your tomatoes, and have a very good day or night according to which time you're watching this, and I'll talk to you on the next video.